Death brings silence, but for some there are words before the final silence, words that resonate and try to reconcile the irreconcilable, a past full of horrors and a future that is fading today. We will look at the final words of some of the most notorious death row inmates. Sometimes they are absurd phrases, sometimes pleas or expressions of peace. What they all have in common is that they can be deeply disturbing and are indeed terrifying. Ted Bundy on January 24th, 1989, the notorious serial killer Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair in Florida. Before the lethal current hit him, he spoke two words that surprised many. "I want you to pass on my love to my family and friends." These words, unexpected for someone who had confessed to a brutal wave of crimes, were in stark contrast to the ruthless image I had built around him. Ted Bundy is one of the most notorious criminals in the history of the United States. Although he confessed between 1974 and 197,130, having committed murders in 7 states, the actual number of his victims is likely to be much higher. He was convicted of the murder of 2 sorority sisters from the Omega fraternity at Florida State University in January 1978, and a 12-year-old Kimberly Lee. Just weeks later, these crimes occurred after he had twice escaped from prison in Colorado, where he was accused of murdering a nurse in 1975. Over the years, Bundy maintained complex relationships with the press and the judiciary. He was known for his charisma and ability to manipulate, and even acted as his own lawyer, which gave him access to certain resources that facilitated his escape plans. Dozens of people witnessed his execution in the electric chair, and his case is still analyzed and fascinated in popular culture. Aine Vernos, the serial killer, who served as the inspiration for several documentaries and feature films, had a life marked by abuse and crime since her childhood. As her execution approached, she gave several interviews, some of which were clear and coherent, while others were chaotic and incoherent. In her final statement, just before she received the lethal injection, she spoke powerful words: "I sail with the rock, and will come back like on Independence Day with Jesus on June 6, like in the movie Big Mothership. And so on, I'm coming back, I'm coming back." This speech stunned many, but some believe that in this apparent incoherence, Warnes was making a final appeal, a kind of plea for a second chance. Warnes was sentenced to death for the murder of 7 men between 1989 and 1990. She initially claimed to have killed in need and said her victims had raped her or attempted to do so, but inconsistencies in her testimony prevented her from escaping the death penalty. In the last years of her life, Warnes pushed for her execution to be expedited. During her time on death row, she made various allegations against prison staff that she had intentionally mistreated. Vernos' life was a spiral of violence from an early age. At 11, prostitute, she traded for food, drugs, and cigarettes. At the age of 14, she was raped and pregnant by a family friend. From then on, her life was a series of crimes that culminated in the murders for which she was convicted as a last meal. Warnes only wanted a cup of coffee, and her ashes were scattered under a tree by her childhood friend. After her execution in October 2002, Billy Coble on February 28, 2019, Billy Wayne Coble was executed in Texas at the age of 70. He was the oldest prisoner to be sentenced to death since the death penalty was reinstated in 1982, when he was given the opportunity to say his last words. Coble replied that costs. Then he looked at his son and other relatives, expressed his love, and repeated that cost 5 with a final nod. He said to the witnesses, "Take care of yourselves." Lee was convicted in August 1989 of the murders of his parents-in-law Robert and Zelda V. and his brother-in-law Bobby V.A. The murders were the result of a violent outburst after his wife Karen announced their divorce. After the murders, Coble kidnapped Karen and fled, which ended in a car crash. After a police chase during the trial, it emerged that Coble had a long history of domestic violence and abuse against his previous partners and his daughters. The jury quickly sentenced him to death despite repeated objections from his lawyers. His case is a stark reminder of the devastating effects that domestic violence and psychological abuse can have on victims and their families. One of the most horrifying cases in U.S. history is that of Wesley Allen, whose last words before his execution were a chilling admission of his own brutality. He once said, "Someone asked me, I don't remember who it was, if there was a way to stop sex offenders. I said, no, I have wrong." These words caused a great stir and indicated a moment of apparent insight and remorse. Even though many doubted their sincerity, there was executed by hanging on January 5, 1993, making him the first person to be hanged in the United States in 28 years. The decision to execute there in this manner was particularly symbolic, as hanging had largely been replaced by lethal injection there. However, showed no interest in appealing his case or the verdict. In fact, he specifically asked for hanging, which was interpreted by some as a desire for swift and final justice, as a possible acceptance of punishment for his heinous crimes. There was convicted of kidnapping, sexual assault, and the murder of 3 children, including 2 brothers aged 10 and 11 whom he had tortured and killed in 1989 in the U.S. state of Washington. He also kidnapped and murdered a 4-year-old boy in Oregon. His crimes are known for their extreme brutality and the cold-bloodedness with which he committed them. Even when he was executed, many did not believe in his remorse and considered his regrets to be superficial. At best, there remains one of the grimiest examples of a serial killer who preyed on innocent and defenseless children. Johnson was sentenced to death in 1995 for the murder of Leah Jo Smith. He had brutally raped and beaten her after a drug deal turned violent. After the murder, he returned to the scene of the crime to rape her again before stealing her belongings and leaving her to die. Over the years, he confessed to killing 3 more women and raping more than a dozen. His criminal record shows several arrests and convictions for sex offenses before he was finally caught as an executioner's meal. Johnny Ray Johnson wanted an extravagant menu: fried chicken, steaks, prawns, chicken breast, fried eggs, butter and honey biscuits, peanut brittle, and 2 cups of black coffee with cream and sugar. He was executed by lethal injection, and despite his crimes, left a message to the Donald Grant. Appealed to the humanity of the witnesses to his execution. Donald Grant, who was executed by lethal injection in January 2022, left his last words that reflected a mixture of fear, confusion, and the obvious attempt at spiritual transcendency. As he lay on his back in the execution room, Grant began to pray and muttered incoherent, confused thoughts. God, I understand it. I understand it. It's nothing. I still have something to do. Don't doubt it. Don't doubt it. He repeated until his microphone was turned off. Grant had previously asked to be executed by firing squad because he considered the lethal injection to be cruel after hearing reports of the painful execution of a fellow inmate. However, his request was rejected, and he was executed using the standard method. His last words reflected not only his psychological instability, but also his inner struggle to find meaning in his life and the crimes he had committed. Grant had murdered 2 women, Brand Amelia and Felicia Smith, in a hotel robbery in 2001. Grant confessed that he had killed them to prevent them from identifying him, as both women knew him from previous encounters. His crimes included not only that he had not only shot the women, but also stabbed them multiple times to make sure they wouldn't survive. Although his lawyers tried to mitigate his sentence on the grounds of mental illness, the court rejected the appeal and sentenced Grant to death. Like many other death row inmates, Grant had a difficult childhood. As the son of an alcoholic mother, Grant probably had mental health issues from an early age, which worsened over time. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia and brain damage, and his mental state made his defense difficult. Yet his life ended on the same path of violence that had marked his own and left a legacy of pain for the families of his victims. The last words of these killers were a mixture of something like remorse, or at least that's what I feel. These final moments often reveal hidden aspects of their personality and show people caught between acknowledging their crimes and their own distorted perception of reality. If you liked the video, don't forget to leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. Until next time.